because life is going to fucking life. And of course, something's going to go wrong. Of course it is.
Yeah. And it's going to change.
If we don't have something more important that is the beacon to what we're like aiming for, that is a lighthouse, that is a, you know, something to like orient ourselves around, then yeah, of course it's not going to work.
And welcome to Fuck Yeah, the podcast where we say fuck yeah to communal living. I'm one of your hosts, Robin, here with Sarah, naturally. And of course, we're also, not of course. And also, Lizanne is here. Welcome back, Lizanne, second time visitor to the podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to be here in person this time.
That's right. We did it remotely. You weren't even in town.
I wasn't even in town. I was in a very different life back then. Yeah.
I know things are not the best right now, but it really is so nice to have you back in Los Angeles.
Thank you.
I remember your going away party and pulling things from my quote unquote vagina.
Oh my God. Yes.
So
you
long
were
ago.
pregnant.
Yes.
You were very pregnant. Yes.
Wow.
Remember?
That puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Because
that was how many
it was
years
2013. Yeah.
you've been gone.
Yeah.
Yep.
11 years.
Yep. He's about to turn 11 and has the same birthday as you.
Oh, wow. That's wild.
Yep. Scorpios.
That's another person with my same birthday.
I
love it.
Who else?
A friend of mine in Oakland and also Ochoa's daughter, Chea.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. Lots of...
good Scorpios. Good November Scorpios. Good Day of the Dead Scorpios, all of us.
That's right. That's right. Do you have any fuck yeahs right now?
That's a little bit of a hard one. But I do. For my birthday, I am taking myself to the desert for like almost 2 weeks, and I'm leaving this weekend.
Wow.
So I am very much looking forward to that. It's fuck yeah to the California desert. Yes.
Yeah.
Hot springs.
Oh. Are you going to Desert Hot Springs?
I am going to Desert Hot Springs.
Yes.
I'm also going to Yucca Valley, Joshua Tree, maybe 29 Palms, doing a little tour of the California desert. And I'm really looking forward to it because it's been a couple years.
That's so great.
2 weeks. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever spent that much time out there.
I don't know that I have either. This might be the longest. Yeah, I'm very excited. I'm really looking forward to it.
It's a great time of year for it.
I was going to say,
the perfect time.
Yeah,
it is the perfect
it's
time.
like from now until about April. I love being out there. And there's so much seasonality that happens within that. But I feel like it's usually this time of year and then like around my birthday in February that I try to make.
I was going to say, I like November in the desert, April, March, April in the desert.
Yeah.
Those are the perfect times, I think.
The nighttime.
January's freezing. January and February are freezing. But
yeah.
What are the plants? Because I feel like there's a certain desert smell that I associate with spring.
It's probably chaparral.
Yeah.
Yeah, creosotes, chaparral. They smell really strongly after water. It's amazing.
Yeah,
It's like one of the best smells. Yeah. I mean, there's always a lot of sagebrush, like California sagebrush and all those like really funky Artemisia type smells that are, they're not blooming then, I don't believe, but the leaves are always very fragrant.
The last time we had you on, we were talking about plants as pleasure medicine. And I'm wondering what's happening with your plant practices these days and your herbalism.
I would say that my plant practices these days are pretty private, I guess. Since pandemic, I haven't really been working publicly with herbalism or that kind of herbal work that I was doing a lot of when I worked at the pharmacy and had clients and was teaching and that whole thing, that all went away during pandemic. And my life has been such that I haven't really found a way back to it quite yet. I mean, I'm always working with plants on my own and making tinctures and, dealing with friends when they're sick and that kind of stuff. But I think the next iteration will probably be a new queer wellness space that I'm working on with a friend, similar to Queer Care LA, which is something we used to organize between, I want to say 2016 and 2018 here in LA. We had it in Oakland first, then we brought it here. So we've got some plans, some little things in the works.
Last week, we dedicated an episode to resourcing yourself. And this episode will be coming out on Election Day. So this could, potentially be, whatever is coming ahead is going to continue to be complicated. And there will continue to be unrest. And I remember poppy tincture was something that came up in our last conversation that we had as far as like a joy creator. And I don't know that people, isn't it California poppy?
Oh, that's funny. For a minute, I thought you meant opium poppy tincture, which I definitely don't have any of because it is very illegal to have it.
Yes. We just need to be opioided to get through this. No, of course not.
No, I just remember we were talking about, like processing California poppies, like you use every part of the plant and it's like it's sort of that joyful spring energy. And I'm wondering as folks are going into we're in the shadow part of the year, but we're also needing to find some light at the end of the tunnel. Can you think of any plants that folks could consider being in relationship with in this season?
Yeah. I think if we do want to take that spin on it of like finding a little bit of light, the first thing that came to mind was mimosa, the albizia tree, which makes those pink poof flowers in the late summer, usually. Late summer where I used to live in the mountains and had a mimosa tree. I'm not sure, it's probably a little bit earlier down here. But that is a tree that has very sparkly, happy energy, kind of antidepressant uses as well. And I think also maybe this is a little bit less light bringing, but I always think of rose. It might sound cliche, but rose, those thorns, give you some good boundaries, and just the general heart holding of rose is really always appropriate, especially during times of despair.
Yeah. I mean, even just the scent of a rose is so soothing.
Oh, I love it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
I feel like roses are coming back for me personally as a plant that I can enjoy. When I first moved into my current home, there was rose bushes in the front yard. And I was just like, I just felt like what could be more like 1950s.
And like old lady.
Lady. And then the other day I was walking through the neighborhood and somebody had just these glorious rose bushes out. And I was like, I think I'm ready for roses again. Like as far as just like what I can conceive of as like an acceptable flower. Like why am I judging flowers?
There's so much cultural association with plants and flowers. And I feel like there's two realities of roses in the world. And one of them are the people that are like, these are old lady things and they're cliche and they're old fashioned. And then there's the reality of literally anybody who works with plants and any herbalists that are just like, no, roses are fucking magic.
Wow.
Like roses are portals, roses are incredible holding beings that I always like at the top of the list of anybody that I know that works in plants. So we choose to exist in the roses are magic world because they really are.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I was living in Oakland for a couple of months before coming down here, I lived in a neighborhood that had a lot of really wonderful gardens around, and lots of people had roses, and it was May and June, so the roses were popping off. And I would go on intentional rose walks to like just go up and down the hills around there and stick my head into as many flowers, as many roses as I could. Because I really needed that.
That's such an interesting perspective because, I think the reason why I was just like, ugh, these roses when we moved in was because culturally it is like a very waspy kind of cliche. Like it has like an element of like...
With good reason. I mean...
the English garden and like a certain... Like I do think a lot of people planted them as a status symbol at certain times and all that stuff.
And so much hybridization and so much like intentional like kind of meddling with them to make them what they are today. So I totally get it.
You taught me about something recently that I feel like is, at least with people that I'm interacting with, I don't think a lot of people know about this, and I think it would be great to spread the word about it, is the appropriation of sage and what's happening with, particularly with white sage.
Oh, yes.
I had no idea until it just came up in conversation.
Huh.
And then I did a little research about it. And of course, not that I was like fact checking you, but I was just wanting to know more. And I was like, fuck, you know? And then, but could you just tell us a little bit about sage and the usage of it and what's happening?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I forget, in some ways, because I feel like in herbalism circles, it's not new, right? But it is always relevant. And I kind of live in my own little bubble in ways and feel like, oh yeah, I don't realize that not everybody has heard about this and that it's always appropriate. But white sage is a really sacred plant to certain Native American peoples. And it has been in the past, I know it's been at least a decade or more, that it has been really commercialized in a way. And I think with the rise of a lot of woo stuff, like, everybody's into the witchiness now and people are into the woo, which is fantastic, as they should be. But certain things have just become this kind of trendy situation. And sadly, white sage has been one of them. And there have been certain companies that I'm not going to name here, but they have been like over harvesting basically, and not exactly with very good practices. Over harvesting is inherently a bad practice, period. Right. But there's just a lot of kind of commercialized use of this plant, over harvesting of it, like this over trendiness of it. So everybody is like finding it and taking it from the wild. And it has done a huge disservice to the populations of white sage. So it's been kind of on a watched list. And not to mention that then the native peoples have been telling us to fucking stop it and to leave the plant alone, that it is not ours to use in this way. It's a very ceremonial for them. And it's just something that needs to be, constantly brought to people's awareness, because it's very easily findable in the witchy stores and the herbal stores and probably even like some grocery stores.
Oh yeah.
And
I think it's in Target now.
Oh,
it
Jesus.
is
and that's
really
alarming.
everywhere.
It's so alarming.
And the thing is if you live in Los Angeles or Southern California, you can go to a place like the nonprofit nursery Theodore Payne that does a lot of efforts towards restoration, and they do a lot of plant cultivation and native plant education. You can plant your own white sage. You might have to wait a couple years before you're actually able to harvest off of a plant that you're growing yourself. But if having sage around is important to you, it is very accessible for us to grow it in our gardens here. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an option. People lie on all sorts of spots along the spectrum, from do not use it if you're not from the native tribes to whom this plant is sacred, totally valid, to, if you're going to use it, grow it yourself.
Yeah.
Definitely don't buy it out there. Definitely don't buy wild crafted sage. Like, please don't do that. Just don't go spend money on it at some store. I would say consider really why you need to use that plant in particular. I would say consider looking to your own lineage and seeing what other plants to be used for smoke medicine are, important to your people. Regular garden sage is actually one that was used a lot in European traditions, kind of in very similar ways. That's even easier to grow and easier to access and whatnot. But yeah, at the very minimum, if this is a plant that you're attached to for whatever reason, definitely grow it yourself. And if you've got a good harvest, considering donating most of your harvest to native people that use it ceremonially.
Yeah, that's nice. One that I looked up when I started trying to find alternatives to sage, which also practically grows wild in many yards here in Los Angeles, is rosemary.
Oh, absolutely.
Roots in a lot of European cultures and lineages, and it's a really, it burns really nicely. And you can mix a little bit of, like, you can dry it with lavender and create
Lavender as
bundles
well is
of
another
lavender and rosemary. And they're really, really effective. Another one was cinnamon, like burning cinnamon sticks. It's more for bringing in kind of like a fiery, passionate energy. But like, I have tried to burn my cinnamon sticks and I get like just the tiniest little puff of smoke that comes
It's
out.
interesting. I wonder if it's partly because I know that like what makes the redwoods and sequoias inflammable on some level is the red. There's something in the redness. I wonder if it's the red,
interesting.
whatever's, I don't know.
Yeah, but you can sprinkle like some cinnamon on some, say like you're burning something in a cauldron or on coals or something, and you can sprinkle cinnamon in there for that fiery, passionate energy.
Well, speaking, one last thing that I want to say about sage, speaking of methods of burning, I feel like what has become also really popular is the sage tied up in big bundles and then people light the whole thing.
Right.
That is completely unnecessary. You can burn one leaf at a time.
Yep.
And that's really all you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just other ways of, being good about honoring the plants and its use and not being wasteful with it.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, gosh, we're going deep into this, but usually like the bundles that you see at places like Target are ridiculously thick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, first of all, that's not even going to burn. Like any plant that you bundle that thickly is not going to burn with any sort of consistency unless you're really setting it aflame, in which case you probably don't want it in your house.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
We had chatted about, for today, talking about communal living. And I feel like you and I have ended up in similar spots for very different reasons, having had some experiences living communally and now find ourselves not doing that to the degree or extent to which we would like to. And I did a little bit of research before we were getting together because I was curious about, I think a lot of people think of the 70s and white hippies when they think of communal living.
Cults.
For sure, I think comes up. And I know for myself, like there's a lot of like Danish and Swedish traditions of co-housing that I had never heard of, and actual like lots of architectural styles that have been developed with this in mind that I had no idea about. So I went on a little bit of a deep dive into what are the roots of communal living. And a lot of people cite Marx and communism as one of the early Western philosophers who brought it into the discussion. And it pinged something for me, and it reminded me of this book, The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth, which is all about the matriarchal lineage of human beings, that actually the evolutionary transition that we made from walking on from being primates to being Homo sapiens happened over a 12 million year period. And during this time, women were very much leaders in the communal structures that existed at the time. And there was massive drought during this period of history. And the women moved everybody to the oceans. And the way that they lived was they had like a ring type structure. So these are early hunter-gatherer societies, which folks like Marx have actually misrepresented what early hunter-gatherer communities looked like, that it was led by these very like aggressive male figures who were out there doing the hunting. But in fact, these were matriarchal societies based on communal living, egalitarianism, and a lot of modern communist thought actually draws on anthropologist, I think Lewis Morgan is his name, and this is who Marx got all of his information from. So these societies there was a central fire, and the women and the children lived in a ring around the central fire. And outside of that were the men. And ancestry was passed down through the mother's line because they lived in what was called kind of social marriages, like group marriages, where essentially the whole community, the whole tribe is committed to raising the children together. So you had a biological father and you had a social father who was usually the brother or the cousin of the mother. And the social father was the only father that was known to the children. And women were in charge of these societies. And men were secondary in that they were protectors. And if anyone had to leave to hunt or get things outside of their like circle community, it was the men who would go because they could be the most kind of disposable, so to speak. Yes,
They were like the ensigns on Star Trek.
Yeah. So from what I can tell, these are the earliest inspirations for or examples that we have of any kind of communal living structures. And then there have been many different ways that this has played out, but it wasn't until the 12th century and really wasn't until the 1800s that we moved into a structure of where monogamous couples would live together with their children. So it is very, very new that we live in this way that we do in society now. And industrialization really played a huge role in pushing us into these private homes.
Right? Like the move to the cities and that kind of thing, smaller dwellings, limited space.
Yeah. We went from, I want to say 85% of the population moving into big cities through the process of industrialization, whereas things had been much more kind of communal, village oriented and those sorts of things before that. So all of this is a long way of saying that there is actually millions of years of tradition around living within communal structures. And it is very recent that we have kind of gotten pushed into these small single family dwellings. And I would argue that all of us really feel the pain of that as we get older and realize, like, the veil gets lifted and you're like, wait,
Right.
that great experience I had in my 20s or in college or whatever it was where I was living with friends or I was in a dorm or whatnot, like there was actually really something to that. And we all kind of get pushed in a different direction.
I just want to say one thing about it because I do want to really get into it. But there's also like the Western culture formed into this nuclear family type of thing, you know, and separates us all. But then went around the world doing that to other people as well. Like there is a lot of communities around the world that were living in this way. Or like I think of like the Polynesian like longhouses or, you know, any sorts of things that like native peoples were doing here, how people were living in India and like all of these different places that Western culture, that colonialism went around and just was like, no, this we're going to make money off of everybody. So this won't work, you know, so... But please.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that aspect. I do think even to this day, there's a huge cultural aspect to that because I grew up in San Juan, Puerto Rico in the 70s and 80s. And I was born into a sort of village, you know, I mean, my parents had their own apartment, but our paternal grandparents lived directly across the street. And then our maternal grandparents lived, whatever, a 15-minute drive away. And I had 3 aunties that I saw all the time too, my 3 tias. So even though there was the mom and dad and the kids who lived in the house, we were hardly ever just us, you know, the grandparents were around, the tias were around, my parents were social, they had friends over. Like there was, I definitely, you know, I got left at my grandparents' house because my parents were going to go travel. So there was this feeling of the village taking care of you all the time. So it's not like these things don't exist in different ways still to this day, I'm sure in different cultures. I think in the United States, modern United States is the most that I've seen personally from my lived experience, that we've gotten farther and farther away from that. And I think it's really interesting, Sarah, that you mentioned that maybe as we get older or start reaching certain ages, that we're like kind of feeling it a little bit more and being like, wait a second, you know, because as we get older, or a lot of people do, where you almost have the dream of the nuclear family situation,
right,
or like owning your own home by yourself, you know, and like those become these aspirations. And then maybe you get into it after a certain point and you're kind of like, well, shit, this is really isolating.
Yeah.
And I think I loved how you put it, that we start feeling the pain of it a little more, because there's this book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. I forget the name of the author.
What a great title.
A lot of people love the book. There's, I think, a lot to be gotten from it. I think I didn't read it quite at the right time that I should have to maybe love it more. But there were certain things about it that I think were very, a lot to take away from. And one of the main premises in this book is that there are these kind of 5 gates, he calls them, of sorrow, kind of sources, or and one of them is the grief of that which we expected and did not receive. And the main way in which he explains that one is that our soul expected to come into this world to be taken care of by a village. And then it wasn't.
Right.
And that whether we recognize it or not, that is really deep grief in humans.
Yeah.
And to me, it's very apparent. Like I feel that cognitively and with a lot of awareness, especially these days. Like to me, it is a true grief to feel like I have to live alone, or only in a nuclear family situation, or that the society around me makes it incredibly difficult to do anything different.
Yes. I mean, that's the thing, is that the structures are not set up to support this. And, you know, especially when you look at like senior housing and what we do with the aging populations, you see a lot of countries starting to try to look at this kind of like co-housing, where there's, I think it's called like the central kitchen, where you've got housing where everyone would gather or does gather for meals in the central kitchen. And you've got really nice shared space. And then the accommodations are fairly modest, like your room, your private area is fairly modest, but that the community is built in a way that really encourages cooperation, socializing, and those sorts of things. And yet you don't see any housing here in the United States on any kind of mass scale set up in this way. There's no infrastructure for it.
Not in any mass scale. I mean, I can think of where I was living up in the mountains in Nevada City. There is Nevada City co-housing, which are these kind of townhomes set up basically in the way that you're talking about, where people have their own private space, but then there's also a lot of infrastructure, both outdoor and indoor, set up for shared living and collaboration and hanging out together and that kind of thing. But I love that too, because it's not like communal living has to mean you're in a cult or you will live in one same house sharing a bathroom, you know, between a bunch of adults. It's like communal living can look all sorts of ways, and people having their own private spaces along with intentional shared spaces. I mean, honestly, that's pretty much one of my 2 favorite things, because I also don't mind living with other adults within a shared home as long as it's big enough and there's enough bathrooms.
Yeah.
Right.
This is important stuff too.
Yep.
Especially to us femmes.
Yes. You need that space. And also, yeah, you can have your own private spaces and then have intentional shared spaces in which you can like get together and whatnot. And I have had that. I have had the living in the same house. I have had the living in separate spaces with shared spaces. And to me, it's the most beautiful and kind of successful way of being, where you can have alone time if you want it. You are never feeling isolated. You share resources, which is kind of the most important thing as well. Like if you have pets, if you have kids, if you have plants, you are way more free to move around, to do other things. And then your friend who lived in the back house, it's like, oh, I've got the chickens for the weekend,
Right.
or whatever it is.
The chickens.
Yeah.
I mean, my communal dream definitely involves chickens for sure.
Mine too. I miss the chickens.
I'm glad you guys take care of the chickens.
Yeah.
No, I keep fantasizing, especially I'm doing a little bit of looking on Zillow because there's the chance that I may not be able to stop the sale of my house in the divorce and everything. And so I've just been looking around a little bit. And every time there's a multifamily or anything, I'm just like, this could be the retirement, the queer retirement home.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Or even like the present time,
Or
it's
now.
like
Why
right now,
retirement?
why wait? Because I'm just like, or I fantasize about like buying the derelict apartment building that's next door and like tearing down the wall.
I also fantasize about this.
Right?
I also fantasize about this. And here is the thing that I come across all the time is that you talk to, I don't know, 8 out of 10 queers, and they're like, oh, the queer compound is the dream.
Right.
And I'm like, why don't we fucking do anything about it?
Right.
And I mean, like I said, I've lived in it a couple of times. It's been amazing. I also just tried with my now ex to sort of set that up in the rurals where we had an acre and a half. And there was the plan to have a couple more external dwellings on our land in addition to our home. That did not work, sadly. Lots of grief in that for me. But it's like we have to put some energy behind it, not just the thoughts of it or the wishes, and then let ourselves be just complacent to, well, now I own a home with my person and my kids, so I can't do anything else, or whatever it is. There's a lot of talk and not a lot of action around it. But the other thing that I find gives me a lot of grief is that I have very recently witnessed some friends or other people actively try to set this up and get talked down by others. Like they, have been told, like, you really shouldn't even bother. It won't work. It's too hard. And I understand why, because I also have seen it not work, thankfully not in my own experience, but I have seen it work in other people's experience. Right now, I have a really good friend in the Bay who owns their home. They are mixed race queer with financial privilege. They have the house next door to them just came up for sale, and they texted me and they were like, should I buy it? Queer compound. And I'm like, I mean, home ownership is a fucking, as some of us here know, it's, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of stress. It's a lot of stress. If you can take on that stress and they're already stressed for life, that's one thing. But also, fuck yeah. Like, I think one of the biggest barriers is financial resources, right? For people to be able to get places that are large enough or with the kind of infrastructure enough that will hold this kind of situation. But that's not the problem for them. And they started kind of like getting some feedback. And some of our close people were like, you can't do it in Oakland. You'll get shut down. Like people won't, like people just, it's just somehow, I don't know. I don't even know. It made me so sad in my body when I heard that they got talked out of it.
Is it like the poly conversation where it's just like, you know what? It's just too much. You have so many personalities, like it'll never work.
Maybe. I think it's part of the personalities. I think part of it is in particular this perhaps moment of time in the Bay Area with the kind of circles that we run around in or whatever, like, people are very concerned with power dynamics, and of course they should be.
Right.
I'm not saying that that's not a thing, but we have seen a lot of conflict happening in these communal spaces because of power dynamics related to class and race and all of that, which of course we should be aware of and we should be critical of and all of that. But I mean, also in the words of the inimitable Sinead O'Connor, like fight the real fucking enemy.
Right.
Like this queer with financial privilege who can like help set up this amazing communal thing is not your enemy.
Right.
Right.
Well,
and I guess that's kind of what brings me back to this point of, yes, wherever we can do it on an individual level, we need to do it. And there needs to be more infrastructure for it, because when it is entirely the responsibility of individuals to make this happen. I remember before having Ruby, there was like this little, talk about just a completely different political climate and financial climate, but Barack Obama was president. He was trying to get reelected, and he had put all of these things into place that made it appealing. And we're coming out of the financial crisis that made it appealing and affordable for first-time home buyers. So I found myself in a situation with my co-parent where we could buy a house. We had another person involved. There was it took a village for us to do that. But simultaneously, I had friends who were trying to buy together, two, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 different couples.
Yeah.
And basically what ended up happening is that the powers that be struggled so much to kind of allow them the flexibility in their contract and how they were going to finance this property. It sort of fell apart around at the legal stage of really trying to. So the structures are not there that make it easy for multiple people to come together and own things together. And this is, so as we are going into an era where the cost of living is so outrageously high, and we will start seeing more intergenerational households. I sometimes get panic. I don't know about you, Robin, but Ruby definitely doesn't imagine that they will move out of the house at 18. And I'm like, that's not what I agreed to. Young people now live home for a long time. There is fewer and fewer really good options for people as they age. This is going to become more and more of a priority, that we have the legal structures as well as government supported, community supported housing and development that is actually oriented in this way.
That would be amazing. I am not going to hold my breath. Right. I kind of feel like where we're at, we're in the reality we live in, not getting any fucking younger. It's up to us to make it happen.
100%. Yeah.
But I'm also really a little surprised to hear that that's where things fell apart, because I know of other people that have owned 2 separate dwellings within one bigger home, like a TIC.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I have known currently right now other people also in the Bay that have 3 owners, I believe, for 2 big Victorian homes on one lot. So,
I think I know though.
This is the thing, is you've got to have the people who can help you construct this, right? And I think it was someone just went to, I don't know what the Some of Us festival is called now, but their queer festivals are often where you can go to workshops and talk to people who are here is your agreement, right? Here's a template agreement that you can use. There are starting to be a lot of lawyers and brokers who are queer and have lived communally, who are putting together these resources. And of course, now I wish that I had them off the top of my head. I think that you can find people who can help you with this.
Yeah. And I think a part of it, it's there's the government, the technical process, but then the cultural mindset.
Yes.
Because I think part of, if I'm thinking of the same situation that you are with the communal living was that there was a certain amount of like scarcity mindset got kicked up.
Of course.
And there was some talk around like, I'm going to put all this money in and then I'm going to be at the mercy of the decision making of other people.
Oh, I think, I
like,
think actually we're thinking, and now that you're saying this, I'm like, oh no, I know the situation.
Oh, okay,
you're
different
talking
ones?
about a totally different situation. But yes, like there's
because there's that aspect of
Yes.
like, how are you going to handle it, especially if you're putting a lot of, money that you saved up or whatever it is into something that you do have to trust other people so much. And we're really not taught culturally to be trusting in that way.
The nature
Absolutely.
of our society right now is that it is so hard to live, and it encourages people to be in this mindset of like, what is mine, and
Right.
I have to hold it with this death grip.
Yes.
And it's
keeping us in our own cages. Like we're like, don't open that door to my cage. This is all I have.
I mean, this is the thing that we've talked about. Capitalism! Yeah. It is by design. Like that is the thing that we say all the time.
Yes.
And if you try to do something outside of that, you not only come across these barriers externally that we're talking about, but internally as well. It's like, oh, but my money.
Yeah.
Or, but my kitchen. Like, I don't know, know, which I do think that, don't think it's easy, but I absolutely do think that it takes a huge shift in mindset if you don't happen to like come it with it factory installed, which I think I just happen to have it, of like, I want to share.
Right.
You know? And of course I don't want to be taken advantage of.
Right.
Nobody does. But like, I think that if you go into things with a lot of awareness and, constant therapization of the self and good communication and trust, I'm not saying do it with like whatever person you just like met last month at the club.
Right.
But, I think by this point in our lives, we're like adult enough to like have long-term relationships with, friends and whatnot that we know people you can trust.
Yes.
And people with whom you can be vulnerable with and with whom you can be real. And, but yeah, I do think it takes like a lot of expansion and pushing out those boundaries of what is possible.
I haven't had a chance to bring this back in. It was something you said really early on, but it hit a chord with me, this idea of grief over a lack of the collective experience, the village experience, the care of many, the multidimensional relationships, all of these sorts of things that I do actually think, like, especially if you look at the evolution that we were built, like our programming is oriented around collective living. It makes me think also of the grief coming out of COVID.
Yes.
Of course, a lot of that wrapped up in loss. But I think for me, when the thing that is having not lost people in the way that some people I know did, the great loss that I feel coming out of COVID was this glimmer of hope that we had around an understanding that we are part of a collective, that our actions impact other people
Globally.
Global. Yes. Like
Not
on
just,
this,
in the micro
Yes.
and the macro.
yeah,
Yes.
it was so, you could just, and as I watch like Ruby and kids learn about the spread of germs and how we have responsibility outside of our individual selves and outside of our nuclear families and our pods, and just like what a no-brainer it was for the kids. Like, no, like I didn't encounter any pushback around masks or any of, like, it just clicked. It made fucking sense. Right. And now I think it's every time like person comes to school sick, like knowing that they're sick. Right. And like brings, and like then Ruby comes home sick and I'm like, wow, that really kind of went in one ear and out the other.
Like
Like
the
it
collective
has-
amnesia, like that. Yeah.
Yes, we've fallen back into these habits and patterns that are completely the opposite of this collective responsibility mindset. And that is a thing that I feel a lot of grief around, and feel like there was this glimmer of hope during this period of time that some of that would have persisted. And instead it's like the inertia that has brought us entirely back to how things were.
Plus it's like there is the people that were going along with it and doing the communal thing, at least for a little while. But then there's the people that pushed back against it. And then it's just like it's solidified into this oppositional kind of force, not just over COVID, but just, I don't know, like just seeing like the stuff that was coming out of that like New York rally and everything, and how like, you know, half the country is willing to, you know, vote for a fascist and stuff like that. And whatever is coming our way, and this coming out on Tuesday, you know, I don't know. It's like there's another level of like just calcification of that individualistic thinking that also somehow dictates how everybody else should be looking and behaving and like all of this stuff. So I don't know. That's like a little bit far off from what you're talking about.
But no, I think
it all
that
comes
you're
together, I feel like.
Correct. And like drawing the connection in that the political strategy of fear is effective because it taps into this scarcity belief, right? That if others have, then I will not have. And so that is entirely what is being sold to people, like, no, but you as an individual can benefit because you believe, for instance, the economy was better during Trump's first term. So, you know, we're going to actually tell you everything all the ways in which we're going to strip your rights from you. But the only thing that you're going to hear is like, maybe we can get the economy back to pre-COVID economy.
Right.
Because that benefits individuals. And so they're able to like latch on to like, oh, maybe there's hope that I can get mine.
Right. Yeah. And it's really the hoarding. It's the scarcity mindset, because it's like there actually is enough for everyone. You know, we don't need to have billionaires hoarding all of this money. Like Amazon could buy the Amazon and, you know, not that they whatever, but it's just like this thing of it's a false premise that we all need to be working so hard and scrounging just to get by, you know. And it all
right,
goes
and
back
then
to
as long as I get mine, then I'm okay.
Right.
And I feel like I'm coming up with all of these like negative examples of things. I'm sure I can find a positive one somewhere.
We'll do some dreaming in a little bit about what it could be.
Yeah, that sounds good. But I recently witnessed a situation, and this is like, again, a very microcosm manifestation of this individualistic situation, where my friend and another friend live in the same neighborhood. They had talked about buying a shared kind of expensive home tool thing, which is something that costs a lot of money and you don't use very often. So it made a lot of sense. You live in the same neighborhood, you could just buy one and you can share it. And that, you know, they had just had a conversation about that. I'm like, oh, that's so great. This is how it should be, you know?
Yeah.
And then I just heard, like last week, that one of the persons went ahead and was like, oh, no, you know what? I bought my own. And I bought one that's kind of not very good quality, so I'm not going to share it because it's only got a few uses in it. I was just like, oh my fucking God. Like, can you hear of any other, like a better example of that kind of scarcity and individualistic thinking of like, not only am I going to get one, I'm not going to share it with you because specifically I got one that only I could use. And then it's like the capitalism in it too. It's like something you can only use a few times and then it's landfill. This tool where you could have just gone into it with another person, spent maybe even less money than you spent on getting your own and had it benefit multiple people for a longer period of time. Hello.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, having this conversation with my friend who was like, yeah, well, you know, like sharing communal stuff is not for everybody. And I'm like, no, it isn't, because it's fucking set up that way.
Right.
You know, it's because you can't see your way outside of that.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
makes me nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that Amazon came up, for a minute there. And I do think that also speaks to kind of, there is this almost Amazonification of
Yes.
our consumer habits, where if I can't get it quick and I can't get it cheap, or I must get it quick and I must get it cheap.
Right.
And so then
I've been guilty of that as well.
The
Right.
cascade of that is these sorts of things where you're not actually buying the thing that will last. You're wanting, and it's a dopamine hit. Like
Yeah.
it's also tied to social media and all these ways that our brains are kind of getting restructured almost, like the neuropathways are changing. We want quick hits.
Yeah.
And I think, for a lot of folks, figuring out a communal living situation, or even just like a communal shared resources structure, is complicated. It's not easy work. And we are more and more moving away from things that really take a lot of effort. And I think part of it is just this general level of burnout that everybody is operating under. Like, I think that contributes to it.
Oh, I mean, I have no doubt. I think that contributes to anything, that is a reality, always a present reality. But I also wonder, are we making it more complicated than it needs to be? Why is it that we're getting so hung up, right? It's just like you can't stop unspooling this yarn, like you're like, oh shit, well, if I buy it and we put in 50-50, then what if you want to use it 1 or 2 times more than I do? And then you put more wear and tear into the thing, or it's just like, oh my God.
Yes, so much is oriented around worst case scenario.
Worst case scenarios and the scarcity.
That's the same
Yes.
thing with the communal living agreement that I was speaking to, and co-buying a home, where I think essentially things kind of fell apart around this, but if worst case scenario plays out, we can't actually come to an agreement on how to deal with it. And it is good. It is wise, right, to be thinking about those things.
It is
but
wise.
Certainly, I know. I mean, this is something that Andrea and I deal with a lot, because I'm a planner and Andrea is not. She's like, all we have is the present moment. And I pride myself in being able to plan, but there is a shadow side to that as well that certainly my therapist calls out to me of but you're trying to control the outcomes here. And there are certain things that are just ultimately outside of your control, right? And sometimes the surrender piece, which I do think communal living, or being really open to living outside of the constructs that are kind of handed to us, requires a certain amount of surrender.
Yep.
And I know that the surrender piece for me, particularly when I get into over planning mode and I want to control things and I want to be able to make sure that we're making the best decision, it's the surrender is the other piece that has to come into the equation.
I absolutely think so. And I also want to think about what is it that we have to surrender to, right? And part of it is surrendering to the ultimate lack of control that we might have and just letting things be. And also, I don't know if this is both a surrendering to and really being in constant awareness and communion with our highest values. It's ultimately, are we going to let that worst case scenario, we might not be able to agree. We might have some financial issues. And then what if this all goes wrong? Kind of thinking is that where we stop?
Right.
Or do we then remember but I have a very deep set value of family, of sharing, of humans helping each other out, of queer domesticity, you know, of being able to like make meals together and kind of simple things in life being more shared and mutually resourced. If that is something, you know, some people are never going to want that. Fine, you know, that I'm not going to live with them. But if we ultimately do hold that in our heart, like, can we also surrender to that part of us and hold that part of us as important, if not hopefully as more important than what are the potential worst case scenarios? Because life is going to fucking life. And of course, something's going to go wrong. Of course it is.
Yeah.
And it's going to change.
If we don't have something more important that is the beacon to what we're like aiming for, that is a lighthouse, that is a, you know, something to like orient ourselves around, then yeah, of course it's not going to work.
And something I want to tease out of what you just said that I heard is surrendering to our values and also receiving care from others. Like that made me think of what Vanessa Carlisle was saying at the panel of like, you know, they're in their death doula training and it's like, okay, we're laying the foundation. You got to have your really good self-care practices. And then it goes to, you've got to also be able to receive care from others. And everyone kind of looks around and like, oh, I don't have a lot of practice with that one. Like that one's really hard for me. And that I think it requires a level of vulnerability for a lot of people that they don't explore. I know certainly when they mentioned that in our discussion, I was like, oh yeah, that kind of hits sort of deep. This idea of like surrendering to the care of others and being able to trust that people are going to show up for you, and that the benefits of the living situation coming together and supporting each other more collectively really could outweigh the downsides of like, but sometimes the kitchen's going to be messy, or, you know, like someone's going to use up the last of my, you know, special seasoning powder or whatever.
Right. Well, and if I can tease the hair a little more,
please,
on this communal head, is the emotional maturity as well. Like, I think if there's a certain level of emotional maturity, an ability to rupture and repair, an ability to grow and change expectations or
and
whatever
conflict, and
like have a conflict and still be able to come back together and resolve the conflict. I think a lot of us grow up with so much emotional immaturity and are maybe still, you know, I mean, it's always a process, and it's, you know, not like, oh no, I'm emotionally mature because I did all this therapy. But it's like, as you're going through that process and then seeing like, oh yeah, like if I had to do communal living with, you know, certain people that I've had emotional maturity issues with, that would be really hard. That would end up in a huge conflict that would just get bigger and bigger until we have to separate in, you know, a legal battle or something. And that would be terrible. But I think that there's like with certain people that you especially have like long-term relationships with and have experienced the ruptures and the repairs that are inevitable, that it is something that you could come out of like even more emotionally fulfilled because you're able to keep this space together despite like being upset about how messy the kitchen is or whatever. You know?
And I think then there's also the, you know, certain level of choice that we have of you know, about how do we set this up? If you know, for example, you're somebody who's not going to be able to let go of, there's like a hair on my toilet seat, then maybe you make sure that you have your own bathroom. Right. And maybe, you know, sharing a bathroom with another person is not going to work for you, right? So there's a lot of self-knowledge, self-awareness, emotional intelligence that, you know, should be going into life in general, right? Certainly any kind of interpersonal or shared living situation. And also, the ability to hold complexity and know that things are not going to be great all the time. Right. You know, I had a acupuncturist who told me something that has always stuck with me. I mean, he was referring to kind of healthy habits. And he said that we should aim to be 80% good 80% of the time. Which, you know, gives you some leeway there to be imperfect the way that we're going to be, and to maybe not be at our best. And that's still, a really great way to be. If like 40% of the time if something's kind of, you know, not amazing, then like maybe just surrender to that, and focus and work towards the other 60 to 80%.
Yeah. You know, and it's like we were saying before about how a property is
So
a whole
much fucking work.
It is a lot. I feel overwhelmed by it all the time. And I literally, not even, besides this conversation, have fantasized about either or both of you being on the same property and just being like, oh, the plants would be so well served because my plants are, you know, they're doing their best with what they get. Yeah, I try, you know, but it's just
if you
not.
go out to that patio right now, my succulents are
80% good, 80% of the time. I've killed plants too.
Yeah, yeah. But it would just be so nice to be like, you know, this is the plant witch of the property.
Yeah.
And to split the stuff up,
people play to their strengths.
Yeah.
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 I also want to acknowledge too that we've been talking a lot here about like, oh, if we could buy something and whatnot, or, you know, it's a huge privilege that we have.
Right.
And most people can't, you know, especially queers, like they don't even have the possibility perhaps of dreaming to like pulling resources in order to own something, you know? So there's that, like we're talking from a very privileged position of possibly maybe one day being able to own something together or whatever. But also that aside from that, that's not the only setup that exists. And that as queers, we've like historically been much better positioned to be, well, much better positioned because of horrible circumstances, but we have a historical resilience and things like that. We have already taken care of each other way more, you know, than straight people because we've had to, because we've been kicked out of our homes, because we've, you know, been sick, you know, like for everything. I'm thinking of things from like, you know, like houses, like the ball culture houses, to lesbians taking care of gay men during the 80s when nobody else would, you know. And I'm sure
or most recently, all the mutual aid in Appalachia that's happening with the queer groups. Just showing up with U-Hauls full of stuff.
Exactly. Just now in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. So there's all these examples of this that have been historical, that are still being enacted. And that is also, you know, a form of quote unquote communal living. So I just wanted to name those things because I feel like they've been left out of the conversation so far.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also like that there's other ways. Like maybe if you still have to rent, there's still ways of figuring out how to rent together, how to rent nearby, I mean, I've been trying to, if we get into the dreaming part of the conversation now,
yes,
you know,
please.
I'm in a situation where right now I basically live alone in a friend's house. She's coming back next year, but for now I live alone. And I've been trying to dream into what are other ways in which I can have that kind of mutuality and reciprocity that I really love around domesticity and things like that. And it hasn't worked out yet, but, you know, I had these dreams of kind of like a cooking club where some people could go to the market together and have the cooking day where we like make large amounts of food and people can like share some of it and take it home for the week. You know, I mean, I'm such a cook. So like the kitchening is one of the first places that my brain goes, you know, around where do I connect with folks? So I think that there's got to be other ways to kind of move towards this more mutuality and more shared domesticity.
Yeah. I think one of the things I fantasize about, which definitely isn't like an owned property, it is like, you know, almost like government housing or something that is senior living, where there is outdoor space and there's group activity. You know, that what I have seen that exists out there is very much like if you have wealth, you can have this kind of active aging lifestyle where you're surrounded with other people,
like
and
the villages.
Yes,
for only $15,000 a month, you too could have.
Yes, and I think that like the thing that I see is like, you know, as like a lot of these commercial spaces are starting to be vacated, and we're realizing that people can really live from home. Like, is there some kind of converting of these spaces that happens on a larger scale where suddenly we have like great senior housing and you're in community with people? And that's definitely something that I think about a lot and long for.
What do you guys think? I'm not going to be able to afford that kind of situation, but I'm like, why do we have to wait until then? You know, and I'm just like, I'm getting closer and closer to that shit. You know, it's like, I don't want to have to wait until I can't afford it to be in that in order to be in that, you know, like I want it to be happening now. I want all of us to be like dreaming about ways in which this can be reality.
Yeah.
I think in Ventura, there's a place that's maybe called The Wave. You know, you'll hear of these like one-off kind of places where it's like, oh, these are spaces that are entirely for artists and maybe there's like 12 units, right? So you've got people who get in there and then try to hold on to it for 30 years or however long they can. It's like, it's just not happening at the scale that it needs to be happening at.
And I think it's also harder for us in the urban to see that kind of stuff because where I was living in the mountains, there's a lot more of that. You know, people have acreage and then people will be like, okay, well, I want to live with others on the land and somebody has a falling down trailer and then there's somebody who has a yurt. And, you know, I mean, I think people are doing this kind of thing all over. I think we have a lot less visual and kind of awareness of it when you live in an urban setting. And also some of us don't want to be in a falling down yurt.
Right. Yeah. And like out in the, you know, in rural areas, there is still this network of women's land in Southern Oregon that was in the 70s. Women came together and collectively purchased a lot of land. They were white, upper middle class women. And there is, so part of the kind of reckoning around this is a lot of working class folks challenge them on like, okay, so you're like putting out there that there's this like amazing way to live, but you actually have to come in and be a landowner in order to participate in this structure. There is still a section of land that is held by a trust that any woman can go live on at any, like it is available and it is operated by a network of land owning women in Southern Oregon. It does not have running water. It does not have electricity. So it is available for people to go to. But the thing that is so interesting to me, having like visited this land, is that it is a really aging population. So you've got people in their late 80s, right, living on this land, and they are mostly surviving through community boards and like, I need someone to come and fix my well, or the things that come up on like big pieces of land in rural areas. And there is no structure for this land to pass on to, you know, like it hasn't truly maintained kind of within that small community of people. It is collective in that they have gatherings on their land and they support each other. But it will die out with this generation of women. And it is so sad to think about, you know, those intentions that they had, but it really hasn't become kind of an intergenerational space.
I wonder why. Like what happened there? What could have been done differently?
Yeah. It's a great question.
Yeah. And that it reminds, you know, as we're getting older, and like, I'll never forget Andrew Gurza talking about how we're all headed towards disability. Like you live long enough, you're going to have to start dealing with more and more disability. And we just need more and more help with that, you know? So we should be living
We need to be less and less isolated. And I'm arguing that we shouldn't be isolated to begin with.
Yes. Exactly.
So that it doesn't have to be a thing like, oh shit, now I am older and disabled. And now I have to somehow figure out a community, figure out a village.
Yeah.
And pay for it.
Yep. Yeah. No, let's do it now.
I would love to. I don't know how.
It's high on my mind.
Any queers out there who want to help us somehow acquire the massive dilapidated apartment building that is
maybe not super dilapidated
to Robin's right property, hit us up because we're going to be exploring this in the future.
We'll kick those raccoons out.
Yes.
Kick the raccoons out.
Yes.
We'll find them new homes.
Any city planners out there who are working on these like government subsidized housing, communal co-housing units, you know, also please hit us up and so we can tell people how to find you. I believe that it is, I mean, sadly, I actually really do think that as the economic crisis and the conditions that we're living in continue to escalate, that we might experience some collapse in a similar way that the pandemic kind of brought us closer, that there might be in the near future some kind of after days type living that makes this all a lot easier. And so
almost
maybe
a little bit like
would-
just went on in North Carolina,
yeah.
where people had no cell reception and you basically could just communicate with your neighbors if you could get over the downed trees.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that was a little taste.
yeah.
It's a little taste.
Yes.
And I mean, ideally, I would love to be able to figure out a reality before that happens.
Of
you know,
course.
which is like already with systems in place. And I do think that LA has something that I don't know if a lot of other urban areas have, but LA is very close to nature. I mean, obviously it depends on where you are in LA, but in Northeast LA where we are and other parts of LA as well, there's a little bit of land. You know, I know there's like, obviously there's a huge sprawl and you just like keep going and it never ends, but there is some land in the sense that there are places that are still LA County that feel not super urban. Like, I mean, your place, you know, I've always told you like, oh my God, I can't believe you're literally in the foothill. Like that hill is massive and is right there in your backyard.
Yeah.
You know, that to me, that feels lovely. You know, like you've got, it took me 15 minutes to drive from Glassell Park to here, but it feels a little bit like you have nature at your fingertips, right? So I'm like, where are the properties with multiple houses, multiple units on one lot with a little bit of land?
Yep.
You know, I mean, after having an acre and a half, I don't want that shit anymore. That was a lot to
It's a
take
lot of
care
work.
of.
Yep.
But a little bit of land, enough space for outdoor communal stuff, hot tub, gardens. Not too many trees that can come down. I mean, also, we don't have snow here either, but
Yet.
Yet.
We don't have snow here yet.
yet. Yeah, but a property, this is what I'm going to manifest. A property with multiple dwellings so that some people can have shared, some people can have private, and there's some outdoor land that can be stewarded in community.
I love it.
My dreaming, wishing, whatever happens, my living situation is going to change soon. And I do have this focused on my mind. I don't want to just be like, you know, the part-time mom on my own in a house, you know, like looking, if I'm in a new
You shouldn't have
place,
to be, yeah.
I want people there. And if I'm in the place that I'm at now, I think that there's possibilities when things change for a more communal kind of space. And at the very least, I want to be doing a lot more communal parties and potlucks and dinners and stuff like that. But
I mean, sharing the meals, that's, you know, kind of the most basic
sharing
human
is
need,
caring.
you know.
Yes.
We can start there, but let's not stop there.
Yeah.
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 Lizanne, as you work towards rebuilding Queer Care LA, I know it's not going to necessarily be that name, but where can people find you? How can they learn more about what you have going on?
Thanks for asking. There's no social media yet for this new kind of gathering that we are envisioning right now. It's gonna be there soon, but for now, my own IG account, Eye of Crow Herbs, is still where I'm at. And you know, if anybody has brilliant ideas about communal living or any questions around herbs or anything like that, people can DM me on Instagram. My friend Sid and I, who's my co-organizer with this, we put out a reel asking for QT BIPOC, people in the healing arts, and we got a really good response.
Okay.
We were very, very heartened. But yeah, if there's other people that did not see this reel and either you are or you know of somebody who does healing work involved in social justice, who is a queer, trans, and person of color, we want to know you. And you can also DM me at Eye of Crow Herbs on Insta.
And I'll just say one more thing is that Lizanne and I shared a booth at the Craft Night craft fair at Akbar, and we're going to do it again in December.
Yes.
I believe the date
nice.
is going to be December 18th.
Perfect.
But I'll have to double check, and I'll mention it here a lot. But yeah, get some herbs and some candles.
Yeah, I make a really good pain salve.
Yes, you do.
Fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to Fiercely Independent Media. Fuck Yeah Podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by Robin Jennings and Sarah Tom Chesson, also known as my mom. Theme music by Suno AI. Your support means a lot. You can give to the show and receive perks at patreon.com/fuckyeahpod. You can also rate and review the show or share it with a friend. You can reach us at fyapod@gmail.com. Bye for now.